For years, Florida has been America's top destination. People moved there for the weather, for the tax advantages, and for the idea that life would be a little easier and a little cheaper than somewhere else. And for a long time, that idea actually worked. Florida absorbed millions of new residents because it offered something rare: growth without immediate pressure. Housing was relatively affordable, insurance was manageable, and the downsides felt worth it. But in 2025, something changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. People aren't fleeing Florida in panic, they're still moving there, but they're not rushing in the way they used to. Moves are slowing, decisions are hesitating, and more residents, especially working-age households, are starting to ask a different question. Is staying still worth it anymore? For the first time in over a decade, Florida's momentum is slowing, not collapsing, not reversing overnight, but shifting. And when a state that popular starts to shift, it usually signals something bigger happening underneath the surface, not just in Florida, but across the country. On paper, Florida is still growing. Population numbers haven't fallen off a cliff. New residents are still arriving. But when you look beneath the headline numbers, a different pattern appears. Fewer people are moving in than before. More people are quietly moving out, and many who once planned to relocate are now delaying or choosing other states entirely. This isn't a crisis, it's friction. And friction changes behavior long before population numbers actually fall. The biggest pressure point is insurance. In many parts of Florida, home insurance premiums have doubled, and in some cases tripled in just a few years. Some homeowners now pay more for insurance than they do for property taxes. Others can't get coverage at all as insurers pull out of higher risk regions. For renters, these costs don't disappear. They show up as higher rents, fewer available units, and shorter lease options. Florida didn't just get more expensive, it became financially unpredictable. And unpredictability matters more than price alone, because people can plan around high costs, but they struggle to plan around unknown ones. And this is where the shift becomes visible at a human level. Imagine a household that moved to Florida 5 or 6 years ago. Their mortgage hasn't changed, their job hasn't changed, their lifestyle hasn't changed, but their insurance bill did. First, it went up a few $100s, then another increase, then a notice that coverage would be reduced or reassessed. Nothing catastrophic happened. No disaster forced them out. Instead, every renewal became a question mark. And once living somewhere requires constant recalculation, people start looking for alternatives. Not because they hate where they live, but because they no longer trust it to stay affordable. For years, Florida offered a clear trade-off. You dealt with heat, humidity, storms, and rapid growth, but you got affordability and tax advantages in return. That trade-off is shrinking. Housing prices surged, traffic increased, infrastructure struggled to keep up with population growth. Everyday costs crept closer to what people were paying in other major states. But here's the part that doesn't show up cleanly in the data. When costs rise slowly, people adapt. When they rise unevenly, people hesitate. Two households with the same income can now experience Florida very differently, depending on insurance zones, flood maps, and renewal timing. That unevenness creates anxiety, and anxiety changes behavior before finances break. People start browsing listings in other states. They start running numbers just to see. They start imagining alternatives they never seriously considered before. That's usually the moment a move becomes real. When people say they're leaving Florida, they usually aren't talking about politics. They're talking about math, and for a growing number of residents, the math stopped working. For many working-age residents, Florida now costs nearly as much as other places, without the same wage growth or job flexibility to offset it. At that point, the question isn't whether Florida is a bad place to live, it's whether Florida is still worth the trade-offs. Climate risk also plays a role. What used to feel abstract now shows up in very real ways: insurance premiums, property values, and long-term planning decisions. More people are still moving to Florida, but many are planning shorter stays instead of permanent routes, treating the state as temporary rather than a long-term bet. Florida isn't being abandoned, it's being reclassified. For a growing number of people, it's no longer a final destination, it's a chapter. And this is why these shifts rarely make headlines right away. They don't start with dramatic exits or sudden population drops. They start with hesitation, with people waiting longer, questioning plans, and quietly keeping their options open. By the time the numbers fully show it, the decision-making has already changed. Florida didn't suddenly change. The incentives did. And when incentives change, people respond, slowly at first, and then all at once. Florida is just one example of that pattern. Next time, we're going to look at where people are actually going instead. The states and smaller cities quietly absorbing the people Florida is starting to lose. If you want to understand where the next growth pockets are forming, make sure you're subscribed.